I woke gasping in complete darkness, clutching my chest as the cold realization hit me. My pacemaker wasn't pulsing. My house, silent, black, lifeless. I stumbled from bed, disoriented and dizzy, reaching desperately for my phone. Then, through the blinds, I saw her. Karen, flashlight in hand, clipboard at her side, calmly locking my outdoor circuit breaker with a tiny, triumphant smile. She'd finally done it. She'd weaponized her precious HOA rules, turning off my power under cover of darkness, unaware that she'd just turned my heart off, too. She wanted to control our neighborhood, but that night, she almost killed me. And that was a mistake she'd regret for the rest of her life. There's something uniquely terrifying about waking up to silence when your life depends on a steady, electric rhythm. It wasn't the kind of quiet you enjoy on a lazy Sunday morning. It was the silence of panic, the emptiness of a heart skipping vital beats. I reached instinctively for the bedside lamp. No response. My room was swallowed in darkness. Outside, street lamps glowed. Neighbors' windows shone softly, but inside, nothing. My power was off, and so was my pacemaker's charger. Panic hit fast and hard. My chest felt hollow, breath sharp and ragged. I staggered to the window, desperate for fresh air, clarity, something to ground myself. That's when I saw her clearly. Karen, queen of the Ridgeview Estates HOA. She stood confidently at the side of my house, flashlight held under her chin, inspecting something on her clipboard. With horror, I noticed she'd padlocked my circuit breaker, her latest power move, literally. In her twisted crusade for neighborhood order, Karen had cited me for minor violations before. Once for the height of my shrubs, another for improper mailbox paint. Petty annoyances I tolerated with exhausted patience. But turning off my power? She'd crossed a deadly line. Groping through darkness, I found my phone. My heart pounded erratically. Each beat felt like it might be my last. Dialing 911 was my first thought, but the bitter fury rising in my throat demanded confrontation first. I couldn't let her walk away, smug and victorious, thinking she'd finally taught me a lesson. Barefoot and shaking, I threw open my front door and shouted, "Karen, what the hell did you do?" Startled, she spun around, shining the flashlight in my eyes. "Oh, you're awake," she said lightly, clipboard still at her hip. "Good. Now we can address your violations directly." "You shut off my power," I gasped, struggling to breathe. "You have no idea what you've done." She rolled her eyes, completely unconcerned. "Oh, please, it's temporary. A small inconvenience to ensure HOA compliance. Maybe now you'll take the rules seriously." "My pacemaker," I rasped. "It runs on a charger beside my bed. You're messing with my heart." Her eyes widened momentarily, but arrogance quickly reasserted itself. "You should have informed the board of medical equipment. Anyway, you're clearly exaggerating." Anger surged through me, mingling dangerously with adrenaline. "You're risking my life for your damn rules." She took a step back, her face tightening defensively. "Don't dramatize this. The HOA guidelines are clear. Non-compliant residents may temporarily lose utilities to encourage compliance. You'll have it restored tomorrow, once you sign acknowledgement of your violations." My legs trembled, weakness seeping in fast. The air felt thin, my chest tighter each second. I stumbled forward, gripping the porch railing for balance. "Turn it back on. Now. Not until you sign." She was calm, resolute. "If you're having trouble breathing, maybe call a doctor. You're clearly stable enough to yell at me." I collapsed to my knees, world spinning. My heartbeat sputtered, skipping, racing, terrifyingly uneven. "Please," I whispered, voice breaking. She hesitated. For a split second, genuine doubt flickered across her face, but pride hardened her expression quickly. "This isn't personal," she insisted weakly. "Rules exist for a reason." I slumped further, vision fading into shadowy edges. The last thing I heard clearly was Karen muttering nervously, You're fine, right?" But I wasn't, not even close. I fumbled numbly for my phone, vision blurry, breath shallow. 911. "Help me," I whispered desperately, as darkness swallowed me whole. I woke later beneath sterile hospital lights. Wires threaded my chest, monitors beeped steadily. Beside me, a nurse scribbled notes diligently. "Welcome back," she said softly, smiling. "You gave us quite a scare." My throat felt raw. What happened? "Your pacemaker malfunctioned," she explained gently. "Lack of power disrupted the charge. EMTs got there just in time. Another few minutes. Her voice trailed off meaningfully, my fists clenched instinctively. Karen. She'd risked my life to make a point, to feel powerful. Rage filled me, pure and unfiltered. Then footsteps. My younger brother, Ethan, hurried in, eyes red from worry. Ethan worked downtown, an investigative journalist with a keen sense of justice. His presence grounded me immediately. "Are you okay?" he asked, voice strained that they said you nearly... He couldn't finish. "I'll live," I reassured weakly. "But Karen..." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Oh, I know exactly what Karen did. I pulled your security footage. And trust me, this isn't going to end with a slap on the wrist." I nodded, relieved. Ethan didn't exaggerate or threaten. He delivered results. "What do you have in mind?" I whispered hoarsely. He leaned in close, voice low but fiery with conviction. "Karen loves attention and power, right? Well, tomorrow morning, she's about to get more attention than she ever bargained for. This isn't just going local, it's going national." He squeezed my hand reassuringly. "She'll regret the day she messed with your heart." And despite my weakened body, I smiled. Because Karen's reign of petty terror was about to implode spectacularly, and I'd be there to watch every satisfying second of it. I spent the next day in bed, the steady hum of hospital machines beside me. Every beep, every quiet murmur reminded me of how close I'd come to not waking up at all. But even beneath exhaustion, something sharper, something hungrier, stirred inside me. Justice. Ethan didn't waste time. He'd always been methodical, tireless, the kind of journalist who could unravel a scandal thread by thread until nothing remained hidden. By mid-afternoon, he'd already gathered enough damning material to burn Karen's carefully built empire of rules and false righteousness to ashes. From my hospital bed, I watched him pace the room, phone to his ear, anger simmering quietly beneath his professional calm. "We're talking deliberate endangerment," he said sternly into the receiver. "Intentional interference with medical devices. This is bigger than local news." He glanced at me and nodded reassuringly. "Yes, my brother's ready to speak. He wants people to know the truth." I nodded back firmly. Karen might have gambled with my life, but she'd unknowingly wagered her reputation, her control, her entire illusion of power, and she was about to lose it all. By evening, a camera crew and a national correspondent from a major news network stood around my hospital bed. The correspondent, a polished young woman named Amanda Rivera, settled beside me, eyes focused intently, not missing a single tremor in my voice as I recounted everything. "So, you're saying the HOA president, Ms. Karen Holloway, deliberately shut off your power despite knowing about your pacemaker?" Amanda clarified, eyes sharp. "She didn't know about the pacemaker specifically," I admitted, my voice strained yet steady. "But when I told her, when she saw me struggling, she refused to reverse what she'd done. She valued petty compliance more than human life." "Did you ever expect this from her?" Amanda pressed gently. "No," I said bitterly. I never imagined she'd risk lives to enforce rules. But looking back, it fits. She'd cite neighbors for weeds, children's bicycles left outside overnight, wind chimes she deemed too loud. It wasn't about community standards. It was about control. "And how do you feel now?" Amanda asked softly. "Angry," I said without hesitation. "I almost died because of someone else's arrogance. If my brother hadn't intervened, we wouldn't even be having this conversation." Amanda turned to Ethan, who stepped forward, voice calm and resolute. "This goes beyond my brother. We found multiple residents willing to speak about Karen's harassment, intimidation, and misuse of power. Ridgeview Estates has been Karen's private kingdom for years, and it stops today." The interview aired nationally at 8 that evening. I didn't sleep. Instead, I watched the fallout unfold live, on television, online, everywhere. The backlash was immediate and overwhelming. Social media erupted, condemning Karen's actions. Within hours, a petition demanding her immediate removal from the HOA gathered thousands of signatures. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from neighbors, people I'd barely exchanged nods with, offering support, apologies, and stories of their own run-ins with Karen's oppressive rulebook. Meanwhile, Karen went radio silent. Her usual aggressive presence was noticeably absent. Blinds drawn, house darkened, her perfectly maintained flower beds suddenly abandoned. But Ethan wasn't finished. He returned to my bedside early the next morning, expression focused. "Well, what's next?" I asked, though I already knew the look on his face. He laid down a thick file, his voice lowered conspiratorially. Karen's actions aren't just morally wrong, they're criminal. Intentional interference with life-supporting medical equipment is felony endangerment. She'll face charges. The police are already investigating. My heart skipped a beat, this time with grim satisfaction. Are they coming for her? He nodded. Tonight. Later that evening, I was released from the hospital, discharged just in time to witness the consequences firsthand. Ethan drove me home slowly, ensuring I felt steady. The street was crowded when we arrived. Neighbors stood clustered outside, whispers of excitement and anticipation rippling through the gathering. I spotted flashing red and blue lights up ahead. 2 patrol cars parked neatly in front of Karen's immaculate home. She stood defiantly in her doorway, arms crossed, jaw rigid, attempting to maintain her dignity, even as officers spoke quietly but firmly. As we approached, Karen's eyes locked onto mine, filled with venomous resentment. You did this, she spat bitterly, her voice trembling despite its harshness. You made me the villain. I shook my head, tired but resolute. No, Karen. You chose this when you valued power over people? She flinched, stunned by my quiet certainty. An officer stepped forward, gently turning her around, placing handcuffs around her wrists as the neighborhood watched in stunned silence. This is absurd, she protested, voice rising, losing its careful composure. I was enforcing rules. He broke them. But ma'am, the officer said firmly, calmly, you're under arrest for reckless endangerment. You'll have your chance to explain it in court. Her protest became incoherent as they led her toward the patrol car. Cameras clicked, phones recorded, whispers turned to open murmurs of shock, relief, satisfaction. I leaned against Ethan, feeling weary, yet relieved. The neighbors began to disperse slowly, many offering quiet nods, murmured thanks, acknowledging that something had finally shifted within our community. Something irreversible, something necessary. Ethan squeezed my shoulder. You all right? Better now, I admitted softly. I didn't want revenge, just accountability. He nodded, thoughtful. You gave this community a voice. Karen silenced people for years. But today she had to face the consequences of her actions. Watching the patrol car drive away, Karen's defiant face pressed against the window, something inside me finally relaxed. This wasn't the petty satisfaction of seeing a bully humbled. It was deeper. It was justice, real and raw, undeniable. She'd gambled on control and lost. And as the evening settled quietly around Ridgeview Estates, I knew this was only the beginning. Karen had fallen. But the community she'd fractured and divided for years was just starting to heal, and I would be there to witness every moment of its restoration. The morning after Karen's arrest, I stepped outside to a different world. The birds still chirped. The breeze still rustled through the sycamores. But the tension, the invisible pressure that had hovered over Ridgeview Estates like a silent fog, was gone. And for the first time in years, neighbors weren't whispering. They were talking, freely. I saw what happened on the news, one woman said, approaching my fence. She did the same thing to my husband last year. Told him if he didn't paint the garage door within 48 hours, we'd be fined $500 a day. She once told my teenage son that his skateboard was a menace to aesthetics. Another muttered bitterly. He hasn't touched it since. Within hours, my porch became something I never expected. A gathering place. Stories spilled out like rainfall after drought. Stories of fines, threats, humiliation, of Karen weaponizing bylaws against anyone who didn't meet her vision of a model resident. One man, Eduardo from 3 houses down, shared something that made the hair on my neck rise. She had my water shut off, he said quietly. I was behind on HOA dues by 1 week. My wife was pregnant at the time. I called the board, and they said it wasn't even legal, but Karen claimed it was a new policy. I had to go to the city to get it turned back on. She threatened to report us to CPS, someone else added, because we left our toddler's tricycle in the driveway. Said it was proof of negligence. I stood there, stunned, realizing the depth of her reign. What I thought was an isolated abuse, a moment of deadly negligence, was merely her pattern. I had nearly died, but I wasn't the first one she'd broken, just the first one to fight back. That night, I spoke to Ethan over dinner. I didn't know it was this bad, I said. She didn't just abuse power. She built a culture of fear. Ethan leaned forward. That's why we're not stopping with her arrest. The board enabled her. Some didn't know, sure, but others did. They were silent, complicit. He showed me a file folder. Inside were HOA emails obtained through a whistleblower request. Pages and pages of internal correspondence, Karen bragging about her enforcement tactics, mocking homeowners, even suggesting ways to escalate tension to coerce compliance. And then the kicker, a draft document labeled Compliance Tier System. It categorized every household in Ridgeview. Tier 1, low risk. Tier 2, passive non-compliant. Tier 3, resistance prone, monitor closely. I was in Tier 3, so were Eduardo, the skateboard kid, the tricycle family. She'd labeled us like threats in a battlefield report. Ethan, I said slowly, we have to show this to the community. He nodded, and we will, tomorrow. The emergency HOA meeting was held in the clubhouse. Normally sparsely attended, it was standing room only. Terry, the acting president, opened the session with a short statement. We apologize. We should have seen this sooner, but tonight we won't hide. She gestured to Ethan, who stood in front of the crowd and plugged in a projector. And then, like a slow-burning wildfire, the truth scorched the room. Email excerpts, audio recordings, scanned screenshots. We watched Karen's words, her rankings, her pride, her malice. Gasp after gasp filled the space. She said we were unsightly liabilities, someone whispered. She called my wife's disability scooter a nuisance hazard, another man choked. The community stared, horrified as their fear was given form. Karen hadn't just enforced rules. She had targeted people, created dossiers, systematically tried to remove anyone who didn't match her vision of suburban perfection. By the time Ethan finished, the room was dead silent. Then a voice from the back. I move for a complete re-election of the HOA board, immediate and transparent. Another, seconded. A third, and a permanent amendment that no future president can enact disciplinary actions without majority approval. The motion passed. Unanimously. The board that once bowed to Karen now stood in open, collective rejection of everything she stood for. That night, I sat on my porch again, Teddy's head resting in my lap. For once, he wasn't alert or anxious, just content. I watched families I'd never spoken to before wave as they passed. Some stopped to say thank you. Some just smiled, freely, not fearfully. Then, out of the shadows, Eduardo approached. He handed me a folded piece of paper. I'm going to city council, he said. Karen had ties there, got laws passed in our district that let HOAs shut off utilities without approval. I'm going to reverse it. I read the document, a petition, well-worded, direct. Need a cosigner? I asked. He grinned. You're at the top. I signed it without hesitation. Karen may have been removed, but her damage lingered like rot beneath paint. We were digging it out, slowly, together. Justice had started with one broken man and a disconnected pacemaker. But now, it was blooming across Ridgeview, one story, one signature, one neighbor at a time. The first time I heard laughter outside my window again, I flinched. Not out of fear, out of disbelief. Because for months, years even, Ridgeview Estates had been a place of tension, of clipped conversations and sideways glances, of wondering if you'd wake up to another violation slip taped to your door for leaving out a flower pot 2 inches too far from the wall. But now, there were barbecues again, bikes on the sidewalks, chalk drawings on driveways. The same things Karen once called community clutter. She was gone. But more importantly, the fear she planted was dead. 3 weeks after her arrest, I received a knock on my door. It was Eduardo, again, with a grin so wide it could have powered the street lamps. They're passing it, he said, holding up a copy of the petition now marked with over 300 signatures. City Council just agreed to review the emergency utility loophole. It's getting closed. He stepped aside to reveal a local reporter behind him. Microphone in hand, camera crew in tow. Mind if we talk? She asked. Your story's gone viral. The community's calling you the man who brought down Karen. I raised an eyebrow. I didn't bring anyone down. I just refused to die quietly. The interview aired that night. I didn't watch it, but my phone didn't stop buzzing for days. Former neighbors, old friends, strangers from other cities, all reaching out to share their own HOA horror stories, some even worse than mine. It became clear, Ridgeview wasn't alone. There were Karens everywhere, and people were finally fighting back. Terry and the new board formed a committee shortly after. Not another layer of control, a restoration task force. Their first request? That I chair it. At first I declined. I didn't want to spend my remaining years sitting in meetings, arguing over grass lengths and mailbox paint. But then I saw who else was on it. Eduardo, a young mother named Hannah whose daughter had been told she couldn't play with chalk in public areas. A disabled veteran who'd been fined for parking his van too long. People like me. people who'd been burned but refused to leave. So I agreed. And from that day forward, we rewrote the playbook. First, we stripped the bylaws that gave unchecked power to any one member. Then we built a community mediation process. Real conversations instead of citations. We added protections for people with medical equipment, therapy animals, and non-standard housing needs. And perhaps most importantly, we created a memorial clause, a rule that stated no enforcement can override health, safety, or dignity. That one? That one we named after me. They called it Langston's Law. I never asked them to, but I kept the framed certificate anyway. It meant something. Teddy, of course, became something of a neighborhood mascot. People brought him treats, kids drew him in sidewalk chalk. Even the mailman began carrying biscuits just for him. He had no idea he'd become a symbol. He just liked the attention. At 10 years old, he was slowing down. His muzzle had gone a little gray. His naps stretched longer. But he still met me at the door every morning. Still curled beside me every night. Still had enough growl left to remind anyone. I'm still watching. He didn't need to bark. He never had. And just when I thought the world had finally settled, a letter arrived. No return address. But I knew that handwriting. Tight, precise, controlling. Karen, I know I was wrong, it began. I didn't realize what it meant until they took away everything I used to feel important. But now, I see what you meant about power, about rules. I've started attending counseling. My sister says I'm softer now. She continued slowly, deliberately, I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know. I remember that night. I remember your face, and I live with it. Every day. At the bottom, no signature. Just, I'm sorry, and keep. I sat with the letter for hours. No anger, no gloating, just reflection. She'd made her choices, paid her price. But maybe, just maybe, she was learning. The next morning, I walked Teddy to the far corner of Ridgeview. Past the tennis courts, past the clubhouse, past the garden that used to be a battleground over zoning violations. And there, on a fresh patch of grass, a new bench had been installed. The plaque read, "Ma for those who chose courage over compliance. Let this place be where silence ends." I didn't ask who installed it. I didn't need to. Because someone else had finally learned what I had the hard way. Silence keeps tyrants in power. Truth makes them fall. That night, as Teddy slept at my feet and the house hummed with steady, uninterrupted power, I leaned back and closed my eyes. Not from exhaustion, but from peace. A peace I had earned, fought for, kept alive, heartbeat by heartbeat. Peace has a strange sound to it. It's not silence. It's not the absence of conflict. It's the laughter of neighbors without tension in their throats. It's the sound of sprinklers whirring in rhythm instead of complaint. It's the rustle of a letter in the mailbox. One you don't dread opening. I never expected to live long enough to feel it again. But here I was. Months had passed since Karen was sentenced. Probation, fines, a permanent bar from holding any HOA office in the state. Her name faded from our newsletters. Her presence disappeared from our sidewalks. But the damage she did, that lingered, which is why I didn't quit the restoration committee. Because while Karen was gone, her ideology wasn't. There were still whispers of the old way. People who missed the order, the structure, people who thought justice had gone too far. But now, they were in the minority, and we weren't afraid of them anymore. One morning, I received a visit from someone unexpected. A man, mid-40s, in a crisp suit, military posture, nervous smile. "You probably don't remember me," he said. "I lived here 6 years ago. I moved away after Karen fined me into oblivion. She made it impossible for my daughter's wheelchair ramp to be approved." I remembered. Vaguely, it was before I'd even moved in. He handed me a copy of the new Ridgeview Housing Charter. His signature was on it. "I came back," he said, "and because I heard it changed, and because I wanted to say thank you." I looked at the page, at the clause about accessible living, now prominently featured on page 1. The clause we added, the clause I'd fought for. We shook hands without a word. And for the first time, I realized something. Justice doesn't just punish, it repairs. Teddy passed quietly in his sleep 6 months after the night Karen cut my power. No drama, no pain, just a soft sigh beside the fireplace, the way he'd always rested. I buried him beneath the rosemary bush, the same one he rolled in when we first moved in, the same one Karen once cited for being unsightly. Neighbors came. Someone brought a wreath shaped like a paw print. A kid left a tennis ball beside the grave. We installed a small plaque. Teddy, our quiet guardian, he never barked, he just watched. That was all he needed. That was all we needed. Life moved forward. The community bloomed again. We added benches near the playground. No citations for chalk drawings. No warnings for bike ramps, just families, finally free to breathe. I still walk the loop every morning, slower now, sometimes with a cane, but never alone. Because everyone knew who I was, not because of the headlines, because of what came after. I didn't become the man who fought Karen. I became the man who made sure no one else had to. One day I passed the new HOA president, a young woman named Jasmine. She stopped me mid-stride. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." If Karen ever apologized, really apologized, well, what would you say? I didn't hesitate. I'd say thank you, and I'd tell her it wasn't about me. It was about everyone she thought wouldn't fight back. Jasmine nodded. "You're still on the committee next year, right?" "I'll be here," I smiled, "as long as I can be." She smiled, shook my hand, and walked off. That night, as I sat on the porch with the quiet where Teddy used to rest, I looked at the stars. Somewhere out there, I thought, someone else was waking up in fear, powerless. Maybe they had a Karen of their own. Maybe they were still afraid. So I picked up a pen, opened my laptop, and I started to write, "You're not alone. You don't have to stay silent. You don't have to let petty tyrants tell you who belongs and who doesn't. You're allowed to plant flowers. You're allowed to breathe. You're allowed to fight." Because my story wasn't the last. But maybe it would be the one that helped someone else start theirs.